Good afternoon, everyone. And for everyone in our earlier time zone, I wish you a good morning and welcome to From the Flight Deck Live, a pre-flight planning workshop. My name is Jamal Wilson. I'm with the FAA's ADS-B program, and I am more than pleased to be your moderator for this event. But I'm also here for another reason. As a licensed pilot and aircraft owner, like many of you, we're getting ready to crawl out from underneath winter's blanket. And at this critical time, it's always important to be reminded of just how important it is to execute proper pre-flight planning. As such, today's event is tailored specifically for our pilot community. And it features three very important topics geared around pre-flight planning. And you're definitely going to want to stick around for the whole thing. Now, whether you're a seasoned pro or you're brand new to aviation or you've been flying a desk for a little while, all of this is for you today. It isn't just about checking the weather and fuel. It's about building a complete mental model of your flight before the engine ever starts. As I'm sure everybody's aware, inadequate preparation remains a recurring factor in general aviation accidents, and it often leads to poor decisions in the air that could have been solved on the ground. Our goal today is to move from simply gathering information to truly analyzing risk and making our best and most informed go, no-go decisions. If you're here for Wings credit, make sure you're attending via the Zoom link and password that was provided through SPANS. If you missed it, we placed the Zoom information in the description of this YouTube live stream. We will be providing the attendee report to the FAA safety team after the event for you to earn your credit. As for the rest of our participants, please catch all the action via our live stream on the FAA's YouTube channel. For those that could not attend our workshop live today, stay tuned. We will be placing the event on the FAST Teams education portal, along with a quiz in the coming weeks. You'll be able to watch the recording, and passing grades will still be able to earn one Wings credit. And now, let's start with opening remarks from the FAA leadership team.
Hi, and thanks for joining us for today's From the Flight Deck Live. As spring begins and the Lakeland Air Show approaches, many pilots will be taking to the skies, perhaps after a few months away from the flight deck. And we want to make sure everyone is prepared. This workshop will refresh their knowledge of pre-flight planning and provide information to keep you and others around you safe. You'll hear from our panel of aviation safety experts, flight instructors, air traffic controllers, and business and general aviation pilots. They'll talk about building a thorough pre-flight ritual, from data gathering and interpreting weather briefings and arrival alert notices to accurately calculating aircraft performance and setting personal minimums to mitigate risk. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions of our experts and share your stories and experiences in the chat. And as you know, pilots will receive Wings credit for participating. Remember, the success of your flight begins long before you start the engine. Pre-flight planning is a cornerstone of safe aviation operations, representing the first and most critical opportunity for a pilot to identify and mitigate risk. It's always better to know before you go.
All right, thank you for that, Chris. So, as I mentioned earlier, we do have three great topics that we're going to cover today. So, I definitely want to get right into this and meet with our panelists. So, to say that these folks are heavy hitters is an understatement. These subject matter experts are here to help us navigate the complexities of pre-flight planning. So, with us today on the flight deck, up first, we're going to get a look at the environment and big picture data gathering with Dave Alfano, who was the manager of the FAA's runway safety team, and Victoria Waller, who we like to call V, who's a flight instructor and a commercial rated GA pilot. Now, you may remember V from our pilot phraseology workshop last May, or perhaps you've seen her on one of our videos as Venture with V. Thanks for coming back and welcome to you both.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So, secondly, our second panel is going to look at the machine, mastering aircraft performance and limitations, conducting your technical, can the airplane do this? Check. And we're lucky to be joined by James Faasal, an FAA aviation safety analyst and former test pilot and commercial airline pilot, and Mary Kuhn with the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, or AOPA. She's their chief flight instructor and a former airline pilot. We appreciate both of you joining forces for this panel today. Welcome.
Be here.
Thanks.
After that, We'll hold a final panel on the human element, synthesizing all the data to manage risk and make the final go, no-go decisions. Now, you may remember Jamal Lofton from our workshop last May as well. He's an FAA JTOC air traffic control specialist and manager. And we also have Bruno Brasileiro, a GA pilot as well as an aviation influencer. Now, you might recognize him being on the Up Air Up There podcast, or definitely check him out at Flying with Bruno. Thanks for joining us, Jamal and Bruno.
Glad to be here, Jamal. Hi, everyone.
So, I said it before, we got a jam-packed workshop, and it's all about you, the aviator, the pilot, the importance of pre-flight planning. So, we're going to jump in. So, I would like to remind everyone participating via Zoom that you are more than welcome to ask questions of the speakers by using the Zoom Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen there. For those on YouTube, please submit your questions via the live chat function. And what we'll do is select questions from you for our panelists to answer during our Q&A session, which is at the end of the 3 workshops. So this particular From the Flight Deck workshop will be the first of many more From the Flight Deck live events to come. Topics for workshops from a recent safety call to action are being planned, including safety drift and situational awareness, deciphering NOTAMs and runways, VFR-IFR interactions, and winter weather operations. But we also want to hear from you. What are y'all seeing out there in the system? What topics would you like to see presented in a forum like this? Let us know so that we can make those modifications. All right, I've talked quite enough, so I definitely want to get into topic 1 and focus now on weather, airspace, and destination planning. So we're going to look at external factors. As we all know, it's one thing to get just a standard weather briefing, but it's another to identify trends and the data as you look at your flight plan or your mission. Dave and V, you have the floor to give us resources and discuss how we build that mental model of the environment before we even head to the airport. The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the introduction. We're going to start off with exactly what he said. So a thorough pre-flight decision begins way before any physical checklist has ever been completed. It starts on the ground, and it doesn't just end with a simple glance of the weather or, just stepping outside to looking at the sky. Our goal here is to encourage pilots to build a complete and comprehensive picture of the environment so that your no-go decision is made with full situational awareness and not just optimistic bias. I know, well, along through your training or aviation journey, you may have come across an acronym called NW Craft. If you have not, this is where your pre-flight planning starts on the ground. It stands for NOTAMs, weather, known ATC delays, runway lengths, alternates, fuel requirements, and takeoff and landing distance. We'll break down this acronym a little bit, starting off with the weather. As pilots, we can get into a bit of a routine, and if you fly out of a area like I do, Arizona, you can sometimes get complacent with weather, and especially living in a area like Arizona where it's 9 times out of 10 good weather. You can just look outside and that could be considered quote unquote your weather briefing. But that's not the trend that we want to fall into. We really want to create what's called a story versus just having a snapshot of the weather. And just looking outside and seeing skies clear, it's a beautiful VFR day, is just a snapshot of the weather and the entire day. It's not a comprehensive story, and that's the mental model that we want to try and create. So you can go to the next slide.
And I'll add there from a controller perspective, and for all the pilots in the room, the controllers are required to take a pre-duty weather briefing before they get on position. So they're going to be knowledgeable of what's coming in their certain area for that weather. So pilots, you can always ask controllers if need be, as well as controllers are required to solicit pilot reports under certain conditions. So they may have a pretty accurate pilot report from you all when you are flying into their particular airspace. So don't be afraid to ask. And certainly we encourage you to give those power ups as you feel it necessary along your route of flight.
And thank you for adding that, David, because coming from a pilot perspective, there is a little bit of bias or a little bit of fear from us as pilots to not want to seek resources and not ask for help from ATC. So hearing directly from you that an ATC controller that you encourage pilots to ask for PIREPs or ask for assistance. It just reiterates the fact that we're a team, we're all working for the same purpose, and it's to create a safe and safe skies. So
Absolutely.
to create those safe skies, again, we have to focus more so on the story that we're creating and not just a snapshot. So when it comes to a weather briefing, it's easy to just look at a METAR, look at the TAF, and just ask yourself, okay, what's the weather right now? But you shouldn't be concerned with what the weather is right now, more so what the weather is trending to be and what is the weather along your route of flight. So those are just snapshots, which is great for maybe just going up in the pattern, doing a couple laps. But when you're thinking about cross-country flight planning and just flying outside of your normal traffic pattern for multiple hours or multiple length at a time, it's better to create a story. So look at those prog charts, look at those diagrams, get a complete comprehensive weather briefing, call up the weather briefer and ask for detailed questions. If there's anything along your briefing that may not make sense to you, you can call them up personally and ask for more details. Look at those area forecasts, and that creates more of a dynamic picture of what the atmosphere is trending to be like versus what is it currently. On the next slide, it's a list of questions that you can add to your pre-flight briefing that you can ask yourself. Is the ceilings trending, improving, deteriorating, stagnant at the destination? How is the weather trending? Is the freezing level rising? Are the winds aloft consistent? And then also, like David said, request those PIREPs. Think of PIREPs as the truth, like real-time atmospheric data that's available to you, and treat PIREPs as holding weight in your decision making for your no or go decision. You can go to the next slide. When it comes to NOTAMs, and David, you can hop in on this topic as well. When it comes to NOTAMs, is from a pilot perspective, especially when I'm teaching my students, it can be a sea of information. Looking at all of the NOTAMs, it's just a flood of information. And you really get bombarded with the wording and kind of maybe overstimulated with what you're reading and what you're trying to disseminate, like trying to disseminate what's important or what's kind of routine. But these are some of the common failures for just NOTAMs, just information overload, assumption, and just missing NOTAMs, especially for your alternate airport, and not considering your alternate airport as a part of your pre-flight planning, just preparing those runway lengths, takeoff and landing distances for your alternate, and then the NOTAMs that are associated with your alternate. But this step 1 through 6 is a good way to kind of organize and structure your NOTAM process and how you go through it versus like relevance or importance to kind of help you just gain a better, simple way of viewing and reading the NOTAM. So you'll start off with the runway taxiway closures, any nav aid or instrument approaches if you are flying IFR, any type of light and visual aid outages. This is especially significant if you're flying at nighttime or during dusk or dawn. TFRs and airspace restriction. That's definitely vital if you are flying, especially to an unknown area that you're not familiar with. You want to make sure that there's no TFRs, no restrictions, and that you are actually qualified to fly in the airspace that you're going through. Any tower or obstacle changes, especially if you're not familiar with the terrain or the surrounding environments at an unknown airport, and then obviously FDC NOTAM. So these are fundamentally structured way of organizing NOTAM, so you won't get overload or task saturated or miss any important NOTAMs that should be relevant for your flight.
And controllers feel that same sense of overload with the information. Every shift is required to review the NOTAMs that might be pertinent within the time of that shift. There's a responsibility of certain individuals within the facilities to review those NOTAMs and make sure that you, as the pilots, receive that information in real time. Something to also consider, particularly with runways and taxiway closures, some of those NOTAMs are issued in the hopes that they will be able to go live at those particular times. Controllers sometimes have the ultimate responsibility to say no, much like pilots do, that they can't take something right from a direction from a controller because they're unable to navigate that or something along those lines. It's similar for the controllers. If the runway's in use, if there's something going on and the runway closure is supposed to go live at a certain time and they just can't allow it, they can and are permitted to say no. So controllers might have the most up-to-date information. And again, we really encourage you all to ask the controller for anything going on in that particular area. If you notice something on the NOTAM list and you feel overwhelmed, just ask. We should have the most up-to-date information as possible.
Oh, okay. So the next slide is just reiterating handbooks. I think, and this is just coming from an instructor perspective, and remembering when I was a student pilot and now as an instructor, I feel like I use these handbooks just to get me through the check ride phase. But after the check ride, and once I got my cert, were collecting dust on my shelves. But now that I'm a CFI and instructing the new generation of pilots, I resort to these handbooks quite frequently and I use them in my pre-flight planning. And I would encourage everyone who's on the call to start implementing these handbooks as well, and any other FAA resources that are available to you in your pre-flight planning and making your go or no-go decision. For example, the PHAC, if you have questions regarding certain weather phenomenons, the PHAC Chapter 13 goes in detail about that. Also, aviationweather.gov is a great resource to look at those prog charts. The Aviation Weather Handbook, I use that every ground lesson I teach for my IFR students. The Instrument Flying Handbook as well as the AIMS. The AIMS is a great resource to get an in-depth understanding of overarching aviation or any topics in aviation. So the handbooks you shouldn't just treat them as routine, but treat them as a training document for every flight, and a resource that can interpret weather, airspace, aerodynamics, and systems that directly support you and your aircraft and your what you're experiencing that day in real time.
I can speak to this a little bit, V, if you like. So the arrival alert notices are created from the controller's perspective of things that they want pilots to know about their particular airport. You can take this as direct communication of things that we as controllers believe you as pilots should be made aware of. These are known historical hotspots, the actual documented hotspots, the potential for wrong surface landings and departures, anything along those lines. You can take this as communication. Now, the controllers you might be talking to might not have participated in the creation of these alert notices. However, they are going to be aware of the information contained with them, just maybe not the word for word. So if you see something on these alert notices, please feel free to ask. They can assist you and assist the controllers in knowing what you may or may not be comfortable with, what you may or may not know. It's just ask regarding the information. I particularly like these because you can view them from the cockpit while in flight. You can also prepare and use them prior to your flight. We encourage you to look at them at the facilities that have these alert notices. And for me in particular, surface safety, review those diagrams. We as controllers certainly understand that from the cockpit, particularly in a smaller aircraft, it may be a little bit confusing when you're looking out your window compared to what you see on the chart. We would much rather you ask early and often, because in my experience, I've found that pilots, once given a few directions, or even just as simple as one or two, pilots get their bearings and start figuring out where they are in the field, where where they're going, what's going on. So we'd much rather you ask early and often rather than play 20 questions down the road, or in the event where you potentially could have a pilot deviation. Something to consider are runway incursions in the NAS. We have approximately around 1,700 annually, and many of them are pilot deviations just simply from crossing the hold short line, not even entering the pavement of the runway surface. And it's because a lot of them are because of confusion, or they don't understand the direction that they were given. Just ask the question. We would much rather you get to where you're going safely, quickly, efficiently, and asking that first question sometimes just kind of puts the light bulb on, and you can go from there.
And I would also ask from a pre-flight perspective, especially if you're not, if you're taking off from an airport that you're not familiar with, or even if you are familiar, again, not falling into that expectation bias or that complacency, have your diagram up on the ground before you even go out to the plane to start your pre-flight. But while you're on the ground, have your diagram up. You know what type of runway that they're going to be using based on the winds and the conditions of the day. So mark or highlight on your iPad or a paper, wherever you have the airport diagram up, highlight your expected route of flight or your expected taxi for your run to taxi onto your runway, or write it down. Okay, I can expect if winds are taking off, and I fly out of Mesa Gateway, but if winds are favoring runway 30 and we can expect to take off of runway 30, I'm going to write down the taxi route that I can anticipate to expect. And I can see it, I can plan it out on the ground, and I can walk it through my head on the ground first before I even step in the plane. So when I do step in the plane and I get those taxi instructions that I've already anticipated, I won't be surprised.
Great.
And overall, just the key takeaways, from this first panel is, again, to think in trends, not just fall into that complacency mindset of just looking at the current snapshot of what the weather is right now, but look at the trends, look at the overarching story, use all your available resources to gain a mental picture of the entire atmospheric situation from start to finish, so you can create more of a snapshot of your flight plan or your flight experience versus just the current trends.
And I would highly encourage you to use all the resources that you have at your fingertips. They're there for a reason. We're all on the same team. We're all looking for the safest route of flight for you all possible. So we encourage you to use the resources that have been provided and are going to be talked about here today.
Mm-hmm. And all finally, just like he said, like David said, just using all your available resources. Don't forget to revert back to those to the fundamentals of your flying with those handbooks, the PHAC, the Aviation Weather Handbook, the Instrument Flying Handbook, and the Instrument Procedures Handbook, and the AIMS. That's where the foundational knowledge of aviation was constructed. So keep using those in your everyday. And ultimately, again, our goal is just to encourage you pilots to make a comprehensive picture of the environment to make a go or no go decision, and using all your available resources to create a full mental picture and have situational awareness in the skies to make it safer.
All right. Thank you so much, Dave and V. That was a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate those insights on the destination awareness. The reminder about the resources being available, arrival alert notices in particular, I found that particularly important. And I like the POH reference. There's some texts that we read, even beyond aviation, you never finish because you're always going back and consulting it and making sure that the things that you need to know, you're actually remembering. So I like that you brought that back into everybody's forefront. Go back and consult these documents because they are helpful all the time, not just in the beginning. So thank you both for taking the time to present that information to us. That just lets us know that there's many ways to mitigate these surface safety risks before we ever touch down at that location. With that being said, let me remind everybody to ask questions of our panelists today by using the Q&A feature in Zoom. If you're on YouTube, please submit your questions via the live chat. At the end of all of our panels, we're going to pick out questions from you, and our speakers will be able to answer them during our Q&A session at the end of the workshop. Dave and V, thanks again. What we're going to do now is move on to our next panel. So now that we understand the environment, what we're going to do is look at the machine that we're taking into it. So with that, our next segment asks the technical question, can the airplane do this? We're looking at the critical calculations that often get overlooked, weight and balance, runway performance, and the invisible impact of density altitude. Mary and James are here to talk about why the pilot's operating handbook is your best friend on the ground. Panel 2, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. We're excited to be here presenting this for you. I know this isn't everyone's favorite topic, but it is just as important. So pretty much we're going to be covering the second half, I would say, of NW Craft, looking at the runways, the alternates, the fuel, the takeoff landing, all that performance aspect of your planning and of your flight. And this is important because what we see, I'm from AOPA, specifically in the Air Safety Institute. And what we see when we review accident case studies is you can really start to see an accident start to happen before an airplane even leaves the ground. You can start to see that chain of events of decision making. And that's what we want to avoid, making the wrong decisions to keep the flight safe. So good risk management is not just can I go, but should I go, and can I go with a safety margin? And so we need to consider things like performance calculations as a valuable safety tool. Small planning errors can stack up quickly, so we want to be accurate to avoid these, and considering things like runway length, our aircraft loading, and the environmental conditions along our entire route of flight. Next slide, please.
All right, so everybody's favorite book, the Pilot Operating Handbook. I kind of want to piggyback onto what Victoria was talking about. I think talking about this is important because when students are learning or first learning their airplane, they're really in the books, and then once they get their license or their rating that they're looking for, those books tend to slide a little bit. It's normal, and so we kind of want to make sure that people understand when we're talking about this. We're talking about preparedness. And so I want you to correlate preparedness with situational awareness. So once you're on the ground and you're planning all this stuff, you want to get ahead of the game and make that situational, that essay bubble as big as possible before you get in the plane. Because once you get in the plane and real time things start happening, your essay may decrease or it may be sucked up by something else. So you want to be as prepared as possible in case something abnormal or emergency happens. So the POH, pilots must maintain a high level of familiarity with the POH to be safe and compliant. Pretty self-explanatory. Critical sections require immediate recall, not reference. Emergency procedures, particularly time-critical memory items. I asked just that because that's more, I think, of a technique. I don't think people have to memorize things. I just feel more comfortable when I'm getting into an aircraft that I know if there is a time-critical situation happening, an emergency happening, I want to know the procedures really well so I know what to do, and then go back and check them with the POH since it's readily available and make sure I did it correctly. That's just technique. I'm not saying everybody should or has to do that. It's definitely should, in my opinion. Same thing with operating limitations, knowing your airplane, airspeeds, weight, and system constraints. Those are good things to know before you get off the deck. Key limitations procedures should be committed to memory to support rapid decision making in abnormal and emergency conditions. Like I said, it's a should, in my opinion. If you don't like to memorize, and some people don't, just be very, very familiar to the point where you can recall that without having to open your POH while you're flying. Because as we all know, when things start going sideways in the aircraft, if you've had that happen, your situational awareness starts getting sucked up. And as an instructor, I instructed in the Navy for 9 years. The key indicators are, the communications start going away. You stop hearing things. you start getting fast hands in the cockpit, which could be unsafe. And you don't want that. So the more prepared you are, the more comfortable you're going to be in the airplane, and the more tasks you can handle in the airplane being prepared. So just a good reliance on the POH in flight is always secondary to proficiency and preparedness prior to the flight. Next slide.
So one of the first things you're going to do after you are familiar with your POH and you start to go flying is as part of your pre-flight planning, you're going to work on your weight and balance. And these are just some things that we wanted to highlight are some common mistakes that people or errors that people might make with their weight and balance. Overall, it's pretty straightforward, but this is where things can go wrong and we can start to see kind of holes in your pre-flight planning. One being improper loading and distribution. So making sure that you're accurate with where things are in the plane. What if someone decides to have their backpack in the back instead of on their lap at last minute? Considering things like this, even up to the very last second of departure, you're getting in the plane. You maybe did your weight and balance an hour ago on the FBO. So making sure you're considering any changes that happen. Another thing that you want to consider is your fuel burn. And that CG can change on your flight depending on how much fuel that you're burning. And so you want to make sure that your aircraft is within the limits both for the takeoff and for the landing. And you want to make sure that you're considering all of the things for that entire flight. So what if the wind is stronger than you expected? What if you go around and end up burning more fuel than you expected? Make sure that your extra considerations of things like that don't just happen with your route planning and your alternate planning, but also making sure you're keeping track of kind of that CG because you don't want to get out of limits. Incorrect calculations can come from things like we've talked about complacency already. I'm sure it will be a common theme today, but assuming, hey, we've done this before, we can just hop in and go. Well, what if your friend gained a few pounds? What if this friend is 6 inches taller than the other friend? So making sure that you're doing it every time, factoring in those small things that might change because those are the things that can really add up. Small math errors as well. Back in the day, this might have been on, pen and paper, but today a lot of people are using EFBs for their weight and balance, which is great. It's a valuable tool, but the math errors can still be there if you're not using the accurate information. I know a lot of EFBs allow kind of sharing of profiles, which is fantastic, but make sure you're getting the right information for the airplane that you're flying. It's important that you go through the POH and the weight and balance sheet to make sure you are getting the accurate numbers. Not every 172 is going to be the same. And if one person adds it incorrectly for a tail number and shares it to you and then you kind of get this telephone effect of one wrong thing could be shared and then it kind of spirals from there. So make sure that you are adding the numbers and you are kind of cross-checking that on yourself. It's also not a bad idea to maybe sit down with an instructor and build out that profile. It takes 10 minutes with an instructor to make sure everything's inputted correctly. I know all the EFBs have great YouTube tutorial videos as well if you needed help kind of going through the specifics of building that out. But the more accurate and detailed you can be on those profiles, the more accurate the data it's going to give you is going to be. And the last is the environmental factor, understanding it's going to change what your numbers are giving you. So putting in an accurate temperature, putting in an accurate elevation, the airport that you're coming from, humidity, wind, all of those things are going to influence what numbers come out to be and what your fuel burn is going to be and your performance, your takeoff and landing distances, which we'll get to. But you want to make sure that you're considering your environment as well when you're doing these calculations and ultimately making that no-go decision.
Real quick on that, Mary, back to incorrect calculations. I kind of want to hammer on this just a little bit because I've seen it happen so many times with not only myself, but other people I know that have had people in the aircraft. Don't be afraid. I think people have stressed before. Don't be afraid to ask, especially if you're the pilot in command and you're the only pilot in the aircraft and you're flying people, don't be afraid to ask questions. Um, I've seen people lie about their weight probably more than anything, flying people around. And that's just, that's human nature. But, I had a friend, I didn't do this, but I had a friend who he brought a scale to weigh people, and he had a luggage scale as well, where he would, weigh the luggage to make sure that what they're saying is correct. And, 9 times out of 10, what they were giving him versus what he saw were different. So just don't be afraid as a pilot in command of an aircraft to ask those questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Next slide. Just a summary, use the correct and current data, very important, right? If you switch aircraft or there's an update to the aircraft you're flying, from the last time you used it, make sure you got that data. I think Mary touched on that with people using the EFB that can share information. Just double check what you're doing because you're the final say when you're flying the aircraft. So that's you on the line. Make sure you've got the correct and current data, and obviously stay within your weight limits. Keep within your CG envelope, and ensure performance margins are acceptable. And that last one, that's really you being comfortable with what you're seeing as a pilot.
So now I'm going to go through three quick slides on kind of that pre-flight performance part of the airplane, and then James is going to take us through the performance kind of real time. So pre-flight performance, departure considerations. Things you want to consider for your departure specifically is the runway you're taking off from long enough for your current and accurate weight, temperature, wind, and field elevation, etc. So make sure you're getting all of those factors in and that they're accurate. How do slope, maybe in surface conditions of the runway, affect your takeoff performance, or maybe obstacles around? What's the expected climb performance after takeoff? And are there environmental factors to consider, like an obstacle or terrain, that if you're not seeing the climb performance that you calculated, maybe you should consider turning back to the airport? I ran into this flying in Arizona. I did all of my training on the East Coast, so I was less familiar with flying in Arizona in June. But we were flying kind of all day. We were doing a literal cross-country flight from West Coast to East Coast. And we had taken off in the morning from who knows where, and we were flying east, and we took off full fuel, 2 people on board, and we were just not getting the climb performance that we wanted to see. At some points, it wasn't even a climb. We were actually descending. So we had to immediately, luckily, turn back and land back at the airport. Luckily, there was no obstacles or terrain around. But what we didn't consider in our performance calculations was the change in temperature throughout the day. So it was warm when we departed, so we thought we were good. But then after our fuel stop, it was about 20 degrees hotter, maybe probably more. So it really affected our climb performance, and we weren't getting the same performance as we were before, and we didn't do that recalculation. And so it's really important to consider the environmental factors that are current to the conditions that you're going to be flying in. And then last is considering a go, no-go abort point on your takeoff roll. One thing that people will sometimes use is the 70-50 rule. And that's where you get to 70, you want to get to 70% of your rotate speed by 50% of the runway. That's a lot of math. So if that's not something that you would want to calculate, it's fine to just determine a point on the runway that if we're not seeing the performance out of the airplane that we expect to see, we're going to cancel our takeoff by this taxiway or this sign, something like that, so that you just have that kind of SOP in your head to make a safe decision and to know when that last kind of point would be. Then pre-flight planning for performance, you're also going to want to consider not just your departure, but your en route and your landing. It's not just take off and you're good. So you want to consider wind along your route, not just the wind at your airport, the runway and the elevation of the airport that you're landing at, the temperature, things like that. maybe it's a long trip and weather is significantly changing. So these are all things that you want to make sure are current and accurate when you're doing your calculations. Always look at that runway length and consider any external factors that maybe will influence your landing distance. Is it raining? Is there a high obstacle that you're going to have to come over and maybe carry in a little bit of extra speed? Causes a float, you might need a longer landing roll. Things like that, just all similar to what they talked about before. You really want to consider the entire picture, all of the factors when you're doing this planning kind of every step of the way. And then last is just that expected fuel on arrival. Make sure to have an accurate plan of your fuel burn in flight, get the most accurate data that you can for your wind and temperature for that fuel burn and performance, and then monitor it, which we'll get to.
Okay, so runway performance departure. I think Mary touched on this a little bit. Distance is still abort to take off from a performance perspective. Looking for a balanced field condition, meaning that you obviously want to have a field that you can take off from, take off roll all the way to rotate speed and still abort and stay on the runway. One thing I always did as a pilot, this was taught to me by somebody else, is when I'm doing the takeoff roll, the moment we start, I'm thinking abort, abort, abort. And then the moment I rotate, it's away, away, away. So you're thinking safety. This is a critical phase of flight during the takeoff and the departure. So before you even get in the plane, make sure you have that runway length that you need. If current information is unavailable at your location, try information from other sources nearby. Local airport, the weather brief for FBO, etc. I think Victoria talked on a few more resources when she was briefing too. If you're lacking information, you don't feel comfortable, know where to look to get it somewhere else until you do feel comfortable. If you don't feel comfortable, don't go. I mean, be honest with yourself. So there is information out there, but you got to have enough to make sure that you are comfortable taking off from that airport. And if you have weather, be familiar using the runway condition assessment matrix and the NOTAM codes. During the FlyCon, I gave it a link there where you can kind of look at that up close. But if you go to the next slide, it kind of gives the example of that. And I put one up there. And what this does is it'll give you the runway in thirds. And so for this example, we have runway 14, the field condition, FlyCon field condition is 5, 5, and 3. And so I can go back to, there you go, 5, 5, and 3. So you have the example to the right showing you what these codes mean. So the 553 is the first 5 is the first third, second 5 is the second third, and the 3 is the last third of the runway. And so if you take that 553 over, it'll tell you that the first and second third, it's got 60%, let's see, 1/8 dry snow on there, and it tells you the braking conditions that it has for that at a condition 5 versus the last third on your rollout, which is going to have some dry snow over some compacted snow, which deteriorates the braking condition. And so this is just an example for you to look at and how to use this if you are somewhere or going somewhere where you're going to be taking off and landing from or at to read these field conditions. Next slide. Okay, runway performance arrival. Big stat here. 97% of the U.S. airports are non-towered. So that's a big number. That's a lot of people flying out there that, from what I've seen, it can get pretty crazy sometimes. Even here where I live, near Boise, there's an airport where there's no tower and there could be 6 or 7 aircraft in the pattern, and they're all trying to talk to each other and land and get out of there. It can be very, very confusing for people. And so when you're operating at these airports, which many GA operators operate at with no tower, make sure that you have the information you need. There can be an information or resource limitation for you at these airports. So if you're listening to the ATIS, the ASOS, the AWOS, the updated NOTAMs, make sure you read them, and then try to find information if you need it. Like I said before, through other channels, because you're going to have to make as a pilot in command, the sound judgment inference for your actions. So a couple things: monitor CTAF well before arrival. As you're going in somewhere, listen up, gather that information for the runway in use. What's the braking like if it's bad weather or any kind of inclement weather? And then PIREPs or observation reports from other pilots. Don't be afraid to query them. Ask those pilots, what do you see? Tell me what you are doing, or are you taking off landing? Whatever they're doing, get their opinion, and get their info, so it'll give you a bigger picture and situational awareness, better situational awareness of what's going on there. You don't want to arrive there not knowing what to do. AWOS and ASOS usually gives you altimeter, temperature, and wind. Sometimes it'll include precipitation. Next slide. Like I said before, PIREPs talk to other guys that are in the area. And then if you're on flight following, which I highly recommend, we'll get to that later. They'll probably have some info for you as well, hopefully. And don't be afraid to call the FBO there if there is one, or talk to some pilots on the ground if you can. And if you have to, you're not getting any information from other pilots or anywhere else, don't be afraid to overfly the airport and look for cues that will help your judgment. So like there's a windsock you can always look at, which I highly recommend for one-way use. And then, look for tree sway dust, debris, rain spray, if it's raining, blowing across runways or wherever they're blowing. And then I also look for pooled water on pavement areas. That'll kind of give me an idea, the conditions on the runway and what I should be expecting if I can't get that somewhere else.
So a few tools and techniques we kind of compiled together for people to hopefully take with them to use is one, flight following, which is just a great layer of safety for VFR flights. Couple benefits are ATC is just going to have eyes on you. They're not going to be telling you what to do. They're just there in case something does come up. They can give you things like traffic advisories, radar identification, safety alerts, weather advisories, and limited airspace coordination. So it's just kind of an extra layer of safety if something were to come up. I instructed at an airport with a TURSA, which you don't see a lot these days, and we were able to have flight following while we were in the TURSA, which was just a fabulous safety tool to have, especially when instructing. To maintain my situational awareness, ATC kind of had my back as far as pointing out any other airplanes in the area, things like that. Also for cross countries, if you are going on a cross country, always have divert airports en route in your planning and as you're going. So always be cognizant of what airports you're passing. Hey, that'd be a good one. This would be a good one. Just picking them along your flight as you go. And when you're flight planning, you could say, okay, we have a lot of airports here where we could divert along the way. And if there is a stretch where maybe there isn't, have a plan or have an idea of what you would do if an emergency were to arise. If you're not instrument rated and there's possible weather en route, try to pick an airport or divert to an airport that has more favorable weather conditions, maybe away from any weather that is moving in. And this is another place where ATC can really help you out.
All right, of cross country, always have at least one divert destination. We talked about that. If your destination airport is uncontrolled, this is the technique, like it says up there. Try to make your divert a towered airport with facilities and resources. If it's your first time flying into an airport, get an instrument clearance if IFR rated. If you're not IFR rated, use flight following. Don't be afraid to ask for what is needed. Had this happen to a friend of mine. He got we were in the Navy together, and he got rushed or put on a flight last minute, and he had to fly across country over into Norfolk, and hadn't been there before. And there was Naval Air Station Norfolk, and then there was Naval Station Norfolk, and so airports were right next to each other, so you can see where this is going. He called the visual early and got on deck and tried to call ground, and no one answered. So he figured out pretty quickly he landed at the wrong airport. This is why I say, if you can, if you're IFR rated, try to go and fly an instrument approach into the airport that you're going to. file an IFR clearance, help yourself out if you're not familiar with the area. If you're not IFR rated, use flight following, they will help you. And then be familiar with where you're going if you're flying flight following or not, and just have your visual cues queued up on your map and know what you're looking for, because you can go into an area that has multiple airports and they're all probably using the same runways on each airport because of the winds there. So it's happened several times. It's happened in with the majors. There's an airplane, I think, in Corpus Christi, Texas, years ago that landed at the wrong airport, and they had to get it out of there with some special pilots. But obviously, the pilot was terminated. So don't back yourself into that corner being unprepared. Let's see. Landing, strong gusty wind. Another technique. Whenever I go into an airport with strong winds, I would do a no flap landing. I think for some people that's pretty common sense, but others they're comfortable using their flaps. Why do I say that? Because once you throw your flaps down and it's gusting out there, that's going to push your plane around a little bit. So just be aware of that. I'd prefer to have more speed and get to the air a little bit quicker and get on deck than being floating up in the air with my flaps down. And obviously, when you land, you want to turn your ailerons into the wind. If it's a wet runway and you can with the airplane, I would always put a little forward pressure on my yoke on the nose wheel. That'll give it a little bit more grip on your rollout, and maybe shorten your rollout as well if you have some inclement weather around you. And then when in doubt, ask. We talked about this in with other people on here. Ask other people, ask pilots, mentors for advice or assistance if you're not sure about what you're doing, and then double check your work, and if able, get another set of eyes on it. One thing I like to stress too is have a plan for where you're going with weather, and kind of build your own toolbox as far as what you're comfortable with. So, for an example, if I was going on a cross country somewhere, um, I would I would look at the weather at my arrival, at my destination, and at my divert that I chose, and I choose divert based on weather. So if my arrival was unlimited ceilings and visibility, it was Cavu. My my divert my divert destination would be a minimum of non-precision approach minimum. So I'm IFR rated, so I would look at the weather there and look at the approaches that are available, and I choose a non-precision approach and say, okay, what's the most lenient there of the approaches that are non-precision? Look at that weather and say, okay, that's the weather it has to be in order for me to go there. And so that's what I would base that on. If the weather at my destination was less than that, or at non-precision approach mins, my diver would have to be 1,003 for me. And then if the weather at my destination was pretty bad, or if I was going to be using a precision approach, then my divert would be at least 3,003 with weather. And that's just for situational awareness, because you're going to try and get into where you're going, and it might take up some essay. If you're going to divert, that's a whole other issue. And you want to be able to divert with ease and not make it difficult everywhere you're going. So that's just what I had in my toolbox. I recommend you building your own. And as you get more comfortable with your plane, with yourself, you can change that as you go with being able to do more. But that was just an example I wanted to use for you.
Excellent. James and Mary, I definitely appreciate the wealth of information that you provided, but in an effort to try and keep us on time, what I want to do is break off from your briefing, but I'll definitely give you the first reattack when we get to the Q&A session to kind of give us your most important tidbits that you want everybody to take away. That way we can just kind of keep it moving. But I definitely like the hangar fly aspect of what you were talking about, where you're talking to other pilots and just kind of making sure that everybody is familiar with what's going on. You're getting stuff from them, they're getting stuff from you. I like that aspect, so I'm glad that you brought it up. I definitely appreciate your time, and like I said, first reattack goes to you in the Q&A side. What I'd like to do now is kind of get us along to our final segment, and what we're going to do is synthesize all this data that we've looked at, and then we're going to look at the person that's in the left seat. And this is where we bring it all together using the PAVE checklist, looking at the pilot, the aircraft, environment, and external pressures. So Jamal and Bruno, they're here to walk us through setting realistic personal minimums and how to recognize when get there-itis is clouding our judgment. I understand you also have some stories and experiences to share about making the final go, no-go decisions, and I'm sure we're all excited to hear what those are. Panel 3, take it away.
Salutations. We'll start off by talking about PAVE through the controller's eyes. The goal is moving from gathering information to analyzing risk. The framework, a simple way to categorize every risk to a safe flight. P is for pilot, A is for aircraft, B is for environment, E is for external pressures. Next slide, please. Okay. So with it, P, pilot, and A, aircraft. Pilot is the human, of course. Am I healthy, rested, and proficient? Are my personal minimum set? You know what works for you. You have some people who don't like to drive at night. So if you don't like to drive at night, you probably don't want to fly at night either. I'm just guessing. I'm not a pilot. I'm just guessing. The aircraft, the machine, is the plane capable? Have I calculated the weight, balance, and performance for this specific mission? We've talked about that thoroughly today already about the scales and things of that nature. It was funny hearing that some people bring a scale to the airplane to make sure people are telling the right amounts. I know for me, um, day by day, I can't tell you how much I weigh. So you better bring the scale to the airplane. Next slide, please. And E for environment, what are the weather trends, NOTAMs, and airspace challenges? So with the environment, I used to be JTOC, air traffic specialist, but now I'm back in operations. I'm an operations manager at a en route air route traffic control center. And with that, recently, I believe last week on the midnight shift, we had two aircraft that were going to the same airport. And the first aircraft said prior to even arriving, we're going to attempt to land at this airport. They had already got their weather briefing and they were already aware of the weather conditions at that airport. So for them to be aware of those conditions, they knew that it was going to be trying to even attempt to approach there. And when they attempted to land, they got moderate to severe turbulence at 7,500. We were able to get that information and disseminate it out to the other aircraft that are on frequency. The facility I work at has 120,000 square miles of airspace that it covers. So it touches multiple states. And that's vital information that we can broadcast on the frequencies because we're receiving a PIREP and we're disseminating it out so everyone can make a sound decision. Um, and the second aircraft, just listening to the aircraft on the frequency, they say, you know what, we're going to follow his lead. We're not even going to attempt to do a approach at the airport. We're just going to go ahead and go to our alternate. So they both landed safely at their alternate locations. So just be aware of your environment and, the goal is to get to your destination safely. It might not be the goal you had when you departed. At the end of the day, you want to land safely. External pressures. Am I rushing? Do I have get there itis? Is there pressure from passengers or a schedule? We all have pressures. There's always different interests that we do the things that we're doing. But at the end of the day, safety comes first. And what's the safest thing to do? Next slide, please. PAVE, again, making the go, no go decision. PAVE isn't just a list, it's a mental model for your final decision. The objective, ensuring your flight begins with a clear, informed, and safe decision. The ATC factor, how air traffic control sees the risk from the ground. And I'm going to tell you, when there's weather in the area, typically there's one hole. When there's bad rides, there's typically one good ride, and everyone's either trying to go through that same hole or they're trying to get to that same altitude. So it becomes very trying and taxing on a controller when everyone's trying to be in the same location. And I mean, it is what it is. If flight level 340 or as 16,000 is the best ride, it's the best ride. And if you're able to, if your aircraft characteristics allow you to get to that altitude, of course you want to get to the best ride. Um, if there's one hole, whether it's moving rapidly, that hole is going to close up. So is it safe for you to try to go through that hole? Are you going to risk it to try to go ahead and go through that hole? Or are you going to say, you know what? Let me just go ahead and go somewhere else. Um, Spotting get their itis, rush radio calls, missed readbacks. The carrier is setting hard personal minimums before the engine starts. Um, Unfortunately, there are aircraft that go Nordo. And that becomes even more challenging when you have weather in the area, when you have bad rides, when you give a clearance, whether it's a turn or altitude or a frequency change, and it's not acknowledged. And now, especially when you're low altitude, the radios only go for a certain range. And then we're trying to do everything in our power to get you back. We're using aircraft in different altitudes to switch to that frequency so we can do aircraft relays on different frequencies, thinking that the range will be better at that point. We did it today. I'm in the operation. Nordos are something that happen, and typically we're able to get you all back on where you need to be quickly. But sometimes we have to go through some extensive links to get you back. But don't manage alone. How sharing your status, weather concerns, fatigue helps ATC help you. Help me help you. Help us help you. The more we know, the better it is. Just like we're looking at a radar scope. If you're in the plane and you say, well, I know you said there's a hole, but I believe that hole has closed up. We're going to trust you. If you're saying that hole has closed up and it's no longer safe to go through this one way, we believe you. Let's do something different. Let's not push it. If you're tired, you let's land. If X happens, we do Y. The no-go is a professional, safe outcome.
Mhm. All right, and just hi everyone. And before I jump into my session here, I just want to say that it's incredible to hear Jamal um, walk through the PAVE checklist and all these considerations from an air traffic controller perspective, because we are up there, and sometimes we forget, or some pilots may forget, that we're working as a team with ATC, right? And it's my personal practice to always share the maximum information I can with ATC, whether it's pirates, or actually having them help me make a decision sometimes. Because when we work as a team, we have two people thinking is always better than one. So a big shout out to all the air traffic controllers and for pilots to actually leverage this relationship you have for the duration of a flight because they can help you a lot. Um, Now, jumping into no-go decisions here, and my session is the last here, and it's interesting that a lot of the things that were mentioned in the previous panels and were discussed actually came into play in two real-life situations that I brought here today. Both are mine, and both are no-go decisions I had to do. One of them while I was in the air, and the other one before I took off. I'll start with one that is actually summarized in this short video here, but I do want to double click on some aspects that I have on the next slides, but let's see if the video plays.
This trip did not go as planned. We departed New Jersey headed for Jekyll Island, Georgia, and weather was pretty good along the entire route. But I was closely monitoring storms developing around and over our final destination.
As you can see, it's not looking good right now, but we're counting on some of the stuff moving away from here.
As I neared Georgia, the radar picture wasn't encouraging. A wall of convection was building fast, extending for hundreds of miles without safe gaps to get through. Knowing this was a possibility, I had already planned to use Savannah as a plan B.
716 Echo Romeo, Savannah approach. Want to confirm you are changing destination, landing to Savannah.
The weather in Savannah wasn't great either, but much better than what lied ahead if we had pressed on.
We just stopped here, decided to call it a day, and we're going to spend the night.
We departed Savannah the following morning for the short hop to Jekyll, where the weather was much better this time. Always have a plan B. Be okay with diverting, and most importantly, respect the weather. Nothing beats arriving safely, even if it's a bit late.
Okay, so I think the video kind of summarizes the whole situation, but two things I wanted to kind of double click on. This was in the summer. I should have specified, and in the summer the weather changes can change very very quickly. This is one of the cases where there was no convection forecasted that day on my destination, but things changed quickly. I was flying a long distance, right? About, I think, 600 miles from New Jersey to Jekyll Island, Florida. And this was a flight that took basically the whole day, right? I took off probably 8 in the morning, and I was supposed to arrive by 5 p.m. In Jekyll Island. And that was enough time for things to change very quickly from the forecast. And I was on an IFR flight, and when you are in an IFR flight or near IFR flight plan, you have to be extra mindful of making changes to your plans, right? You have to work with ATC, and that's what I did. So on the next slide, I have a few snapshots of the some moments here. I think you heard on the video the controller from Savannah confirming with me that I was diverting from my original flight plan. So before that call, I had actually reached out to them and said, I'm diverting to Savannah, and that's where I wanted to land. He confirmed with me, and quickly he issued me vectors to land at Savannah, where the weather wasn't great. It wasn't VFR, it was actually marginal VFR, but definitely within my personal minimums. The choice that I had that day was to, keep going, keep getting closer to that convection area and see what would happen. Or I had the option to make take the safer way out and land either wait it out or just decide to go the following day. So to me, and this is something that I learned in my flying experience of now close to 1,300 hours. A pilot's brain is always wired to go fly and to get to their destination, right? Which is why it's so natural for the decision to not go or to not give up your plans, whether it's your destination, your flight. It's so low on our list of priorities. It's so natural to try everything else before you call off that flight, before you change your destination, that will get you late to where you need to go. Maybe it will imply having to, spend some resources to spend a night somewhere else and things like that. But I've come to learn that when you depart, if you have that plan B solid in your plan, it's part of your pre-flight planning. And the minute you have to make a decision to switch to that plan B, you don't have to think. You don't have to think about the consequences or perhaps have the weight of the oh, I'm not gonna get there in time, or the cons, let's say, of not getting to your destination or making that flight weigh in on you. So this is an example of what happened that day. And mind you, I was when I made that decision, I was already in IMC. It was getting late in the day. It was about to get dark, and like I said, I had been flying for about 6 to 7 hours. So I wasn't the same pilot that I was 8 a.m. that morning when I took off from New Jersey, right? So all these things quickly came to my mind. It was like, well, those are 3 strikes right there. And that's my limit. And I decided to divert. I felt that it was safe. And Savannah is obviously a city where it would be easy to find a hotel, transportation, and things like that. So it all kind of came to plan, and I had already planned on going there if something happened, right? So this is an example number one. It's also interesting that sometimes we think about no-go decisions only being made before you take off, before you head to the airport, right? This was a decision of a no-go decision that I had to make in flight in IMC on an IFR flight plan, and that I had to work with ATC to actually make happen. So that's another kind of no-go decision. Sometimes it happens in the air, but you still have to be mindful of your limitations, your plane's limitations, what you're personally comfortable with, and make sure that you are staying on the right side of your personal minimums. Don't try to change them or try to do something new in flight just because you have to be somewhere, right? So this is an example number one. I believe, and the interesting thing, I took this picture after I landed. One curious story about this is I remember in that when flying the approach into Savannah that day, I was following another small single engine plane. I didn't know who it was at the time, but I just knew that I was following them because I could see them on my ADSB and ATC talking to them. And after I landed, I actually ran into a couple of friends at the FBO that were flying from, I think it was South Carolina down to Florida, and decided to divert to Savannah for the exact same reason. So it was actually a nice way to prove that, well, I made the right decision, you know. So and they were there for the same decision. This is a photo after I landed the plane. You can see that there was rain, overcast skies, and so it was definitely the right decision I made there. I got 1 day late to my destination, but that didn't make it any my vacation any worse. And in fact, I was actually proud of myself for making a decision that undoubtedly was the safest one. Maybe there was a hole that I could get through. Maybe if I had pressed it on, I would get lucky. Maybe. But between maybe and there's like a certain safe way out, I'll always take the latter. And I will always encourage pilots to think the same way. Um, now I have another example, completely different one, and it actually has some overlap with one of the examples that Mary shared earlier about being East Coast pilot flying in the high desert, right? So this was a no-go decision that I had to make in the Grand Canyon, which is for a pilot like me that learned to fly and lives on the East Coast, a completely different environment in every shape or form. So I'll walk you through. I have some photos here to tell you the story about what happened. So this is the day that I'm flying from Monument Valley Airport, which is in the middle of Monument Valley, to Sedona. And I plan on doing a scenic flight over the Grand Canyon, which was also a natural route to get from, my original destination, my original departure point to my destination. And I stopped in Page, Arizona for fuel. On my way to Page, Arizona, the photo on the top right there, that was what I saw, outside the plane. This layer of clouds that it wasn't necessarily overcast, but it was pretty much broken right at the height of the terrain, right? And that to me sounded a first alarm. I was like, well, if the mountains are or the clouds are at the height of the mountains, that's mountain obscuration in a place that I don't know. I don't know how the mountains are. I definitely have my charts and I have access to information about the terrain, but this is a different environment for me. I haven't flown here. I don't know the terrain like I know back home, right? So that was sort of like the first flag, and then I kept looking at my radar and the resources I had during my flight at my disposal on the ground. And as you can see, you see that area there of precipitation and the greens and even some yellows and arrows showing that there was a trend of the weather not only staying in the area, but with a chance that it could get worse. It could rain more clouds and all of that, right? And the other factor is I had to fly high because of the terrain. You can only cross the Grand Canyon at 10,000 feet, 10,500 feet or above for VFR aircraft, which was my case. And so I have to be up high. That means lower temperatures. That I was already departing from a place where density altitude was a factor. These airports, Page, Arizona, I think sits at 4,500 feet MSL, which means that you were usually departing that. This was in September. The DA at density altitude at the airport was at least 6 to 7,000 feet. So my plane's performance is naturally degraded. I'm looking at weather ahead of me with terrain around me as well that I don't know and that could pose a threat because these are high mountains. And so basically, so we talked about the three strikes earlier. So this is an example. I really had my three strikes. Number one, high terrain, which is a very different environment from what I have. So that's number one. Number two, being unfamiliar with the area, with the environment around me, and in which would be a situation where having plenty of visibility and good weather will make a huge difference to my flight. And then lastly, the risk of having to go into IFR conditions or VMC into IMC and potential icing too, because up high there, the temperatures could be low enough that the precipitation that was around the area could turn into ice on my plane. So that was enough for me to say, well, three strikes, I'm not flying today. And I had to make that decision at the airport that I stopped to get fuel and actually book a last minute hotel, see like come up with a way to get to the hotel. Ubers weren't vastly available there. So I canceled that flight. But here's what I did because I wanted a gut check. After getting back home after that trip, this was weeks later, I fired up my flight simulator, the Microsoft Flight Simulator, and I went back to the day and recreated the weather, the exact weather conditions, because I was recording that day. So I had recordings of the weather that was being broadcasted on my airport, and I also had the picture and recordings of my EFB where I had the altitudes, the altimeter settings, and everything. So I recreated the flight in Flight Simulator, and look what I got. I was flying at the exact same altitude that I would that day, which was 10,500 feet. You can see in the bottom image here that the outside air temperature was -6 degrees. So, considerably below freezing. And Flight Simulator these days has a really incredible way of depicting weather and the effects of weather on an airplane. Granted, it is a flight simulator, but still, it can give you a general idea of what to expect. On the photo above, you can actually see some icing forming on the window there. So that to me gave me like a general idea of what scenario I could expect if I had made the decision to press on. And while, I could perhaps have taken off and halfway there looked at the weather in front of me and was like, I'll do a 180 and go back to my airport. Yeah, I definitely could. But I was in a situation where I would be flying high, my performance is degraded. If I had to climb quickly, I knew that my plane wouldn't be capable of. I was almost fully loaded, so all of these things came to my consideration. And then the next slide too, the other factor is I think I started saying that I was trying to do the Grand Canyon fly for scenic reasons, and this would be the views I would have outside my window had I chose to do that flight. So it wouldn't be great, right? So this again, these two examples here, one no-go situation where I had to, that I took mid-flight, and the other one before a flight, both had consequences, if you will. And I had to quickly change plans and try to figure out where I would spend the night, and all of that stuff. But the truth is, I'm here to tell these stories. And I think that's the most important thing. My advice for every pilot is really don't go if it doesn't feel right. I feel like that same idea has been conveyed by the other panelists here before in several different ways. But coming from a pilot who's been I always challenge myself to go to different places, to go to different destinations, and even experience different things in the plane, whether it's weather related or flying to international destinations and all of that. I establish my personal minimums and I stick with them, even if it means um, canceling a flight, disappointing someone. But I know that just being on the ground and being somewhere safe will always be having a really bad experience trying to get there in the first place.
Excellent. Jamal and Bruno, listen, that was fantastic presentation. I like that you guys brought all the information that talks about, the weather briefing is perfect. Your airplane's great, but the final safety check is always right here, right? What's happening between the headsets to make sure that you're, like you said, trusting your intuition. If it doesn't feel right, don't go. It's those type of human factors where you can kind of get back from the get there-itis and using the data to make a good go, no-go decision. Definitely appreciate both of y'all's time and expertise. And what I want to do now, with the last few minutes that we have left here, I want to transition to our question and answer session. Now, as I said before, we have been collecting questions from Zoom and YouTube. And on top of that, the group has been really pounding away on answering questions online as we've been going through this. So I definitely appreciate the panelists for taking the time to answer those questions. But we do have a few more that I want to ask. The first question, because I kind of encroached a little bit on panel two earlier, I want to come back to them and give them the first reattack. So the question is having to do with max weight aircraft performance. So the actual question is, do you recommend periodic flight tests at max gross weight to verify POH performance numbers and to check your pilot performance also? So for panel two, I don't know if Mary or James wants to go first. We'll be a gentleman and say, Mary, you can go first, and then I'll ask James what you guys think about that from a performance perspective.
I think it's always smart to be always kind of monitoring what the output of your plane is, watching what your fuel burn is compared to what the winds are doing, on a cross country flight, what the output is of the plane in general, just which is a lot easier if you own a plane. I understand if you're renting from a school or a flying club, it's going to be harder to kind of keep track of that. Would say that in all the performance numbers that we talk about having a safety margin, landing distance, takeoff distance. And I think that I think that also is included in your weight and balance. So wouldn't necessarily say to fly at max gross weight, just because I would want a safety margin of my max gross weight to make sure that I'm not going over it. Because as soon as you're over max gross weight, then essentially you are volunteering to be a test pilot that you are not, just to see what's going to happen. So I think it's absolutely great to keep track of what your plane is doing and the performance that you see from it, but tread lightly when you're getting too close to max weight and make sure to maintain a safety margin. I don't know. James, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for me, my first question was, well, why would you want to do this? Because someone's already done that. Like you said, as a test pilot, they've
Yeah.
created those numbers. But there could be a scenario where you need to do that. My immediate thoughts were like you said, Mary. Um, Max weight, you're already at reduced margins, right? So if something doesn't go as planned, you don't have a lot to work with. And even again, Mary, looking at the story you told earlier about out of Arizona, um, the first things I thought of were, longer takeoff roll. You take off, it doesn't go as planned. And then you got to come back to an airfield where you're probably going to be too heavy to land within limits now. You're probably exceeding the max landing weight, right? And so now you have a longer rollout and all kinds of these things you got to think of. So my immediate answer would be no, but I can't say that because maybe there's a reason why you're doing it. So those are the things to take into account really are the margins and the effects it's going to have on your performance. And then if there's a reason why you have to land right away. So, and of course, taking your takeoff. So take that into effect. Those are things I thought of.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that, James and Mary. I saw that question pop up and immediately thought of you when you were going through the performance calculations that seemed to tie right in. I do want to jump back to panel one because there was a question that popped up and it has to do with the acronym V that you were talking about, NW Craft. And would you mind just kind of walking everybody through what each of those letters mean in the acronym?
Yeah, absolutely. So I saw the question asked as well. And I just want to clarify that NW, the craft, craft is spelled with a K and not a C. So the N stands for notice. And again, this NW craft is just an acronym that you would use for your pre-flight planning to help you organize that systematic thought process of like getting all your information organized and ready to go before you even step out to the plane. So the N stands for NOTAMs. So any type of NOTAMs that you will receive for your destination, your current airport, and then your alternate as well. The weather, so the W stands for weather. So getting a comprehensive weather briefing. And this is the craft. So instead of the C, it's the K. So known ATC delays. R stands for runway lengths. The runway lengths for your takeoff and your airport that you're taking off, your airport that you're arriving to, and also your alternate. A stands for alternate airport, should you require one, your fuel calculations, and then finally your takeoff and landing distances for your airport that you're taking off, your destination, as well as your alternate.
All right, outstanding. Thank you for that. There was actually another question that came, and they were answering the question too. So obviously, everybody was listening to what you were saying, and they were repeating that back. So that's a good thing. There was another comment that came, And it was an observation more than a question. It says, I would like to make the observation that you appear to be in top-notch aircraft. Remember, performance figures are for new and perfect aircraft. Mine is not new nor not perfect. Join the club, sir. My aircraft is 60 years old. What I would say is, and I know Bruno might have something to say about this also, the tactile function of flying, you want to stay in tune with the aircraft. There are things that will happen atmospherically when you're hot, um, high altitude. She feels sluggish, but sometimes there are things that crop up and you feel it, and it keys you to something performance-wise that you should look at. Case in point, I lost about 5 or 6 knots off of a few flights, and something just was off. The airplane was not performing the way I thought it was. Turns out I had a cracked cylinder, and I was losing that compression. The other 3 cylinders were working as hard as they could, but that performance drop, it immediately availed itself to you because once you remain in tune with the aircraft, you're paying attention to what's going on, those things kind of jump out at you. Bruno, I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to talk about as well.
Yeah, in addition to what you said, a 60-year-old aircraft or a 45-year-old aircraft in my case has been through a lot of changes throughout the year. You know, they may have the two new cylinders 20 years ago, maybe an engine that was overhauled or something new or modifications that can actually technically make it perform better than the POH numbers. So the truth is, there's a lot that happens to an aircraft in that span of time that will definitely make it perform differently from those POH numbers that are very optimistic. And to Preston's point, based on the performance that where they just rolled out of the factory, right? So I back to what something that Mary said earlier. I feel like the answer to it is really to have that safety margin. Look at the POH, look at the numbers, but don't assume that's what you're going to get. It's said environment or temperature or whatever. Just count on your plane being not as great as the POH says, and that I feel like that always keeps you within a safe margin where you can operate, safely.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Bruno. It's tough to say because it feels like we just started, but we're just about at the end of our session here. But what I would like to do before we close up is I want to give each panelist the opportunity to give one parting statement or nugget of information they want everybody to take away before I go ahead and close. What I like to do is I'll go back to panel one. So I'll go V, then Dave, then Mary, then James, then Bruno, and Jamal for you guys to give any parting gems to the group.
A parting gem from my perspective would just to be, I believe we spoke about it in another one of the panels as well later on, but to have like a strike process. I personally have a 3 strike minimum for for saying a go or no go decision. So allowing yourself 3 strikes and then committing to that. So whether it be maybe you're going through the PAVE checklist and something's off, maybe you're going through that NW craft and something is off, or you're just checking in with yourself with the I'm safe checklist. Have those 3 strikes to create your no or go or no go decision.
My takeaway would be to stick with the basics. The basics were created historically over time by professionals better than us in many regards, and they've worked. They've kept people safe. So stick with the basics, and don't be afraid to ask for help. We are particularly for air traffic controllers. Ask them for help. That's what they're there for. It makes everybody's job more efficient, easy, and explainable down the road. So just stick with those 2 things, and we should all be kept safe.
I would say my key takeaway today would be mindfulness. It's very easy to calculate if you have enough runway, if you're below max gross weight. But what is key when making these go no go decisions and staying safe is being mindful of what you and your aircraft are capable of and being honest with yourself. If you're familiar with the aircraft, if you're familiar with the avionics, if you're being honest with yourself about the weather, things like that, you really need to consider when you're making these decisions, because it can look safe on paper, but if the pilot is not prepared for the given conditions, then it won't be a safe flight.
James, you're talking, but you might want to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
All good responses here. To kind of piggyback on what Mary said, um, mindfulness as you grow as a pilot, I would say learn to build processes and checklists for yourself. Everything can say go, and yet something in you is telling you not to follow that instinct, whatever seems right. But just build processes that you can stick to, and maybe be conservative when you're starting out, and then as you get better and more experience, you can broaden those a little bit. But then, don't talk yourself into a corner. So, um, as you grow in experience, those processes and checklists that you build and for your toolbox can become less conservative, but start low. And if you get in those situations where you don't have what you need, then be honest with yourself and assess it and say, you know what, I'm not going to go. Don't be afraid to do that.
My parting words and perhaps an advice that I've given to a lot of pilots that I've met throughout my flying journey is never stop being the student pilot you were when you first entered an aircraft, where you were extra mindful of pre-flight, you were extra mindful of weather, and you respected the aircraft, and the environment by the maximum. I feel like the more experience we have, and gain, the easier it is for us to start lowering our bar of like what's safe and what we can do. And I always, every time I walk up to my plane for a flight, I always remind myself of myself pre-flying the flight school plane where I learned to fly. And I feel like if we never let go of those initial basic learnings that we get, when we're student pilots, we'll be safer pilots no matter how many hours and how much experience we have.
Um, as a operations manager, I feel like it's my responsibility to make sure I'm putting everyone in a winning position. I'm making sure the supervisor's in a position to win, and they're putting the controllers in a position to win. But most importantly, you need to put yourself in a position to win. So if you're not setting yourself up for success, you're setting yourself up for failure. So I think my takeaway from all of this with the pre-flights and all these things, just like today, current day, today, if you are going to Florida, if you haven't looked into it, you're probably going to have to stay low altitude if you are a jet. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's very important to put yourself in a winning position and never set yourself up for failure.
Excellent. Excellent. All great feedback. I do want to give a heartfelt thanks to everybody, all the panelists that are here today. Incredible information. I'm glad that you shared your expertise with everybody, including myself today. We're all better aviators for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To our
Well,
attendees today, this workshop has been a fantastic opportunity for pilot education. We're all leaving with a wealth of knowledge and good reminders. To everybody in the audience, thank you for being with us today. In case you missed any part of today's workshop, you can catch the replay of the live stream on the FAA's YouTube channel. After this webinar, what we'll do is we'll share the list of Zoom attendees with the FAST team so you can earn your wings credit for your participation. Also, stay informed with us. For more information and additional resources, please visit faa.gov/go/runway safety and faa.gov/go/from the flight deck. If you have any questions or want to share your thoughts on aviation communications and runway safety, you'll find contact information there. We also have our FAAsafety.gov website, where pilots can find dozens of resources, courses, and other live events, as well as the Wings program. And the FAA Safety Briefing magazine has various pilot safety articles and resources as well. You can access it online at the QR code or links on the screen. We genuinely hope that this equips you for your next journey. Always remember, it's better to know before you go. I'm Jamal Wilson. Fly safe, everyone.